Become proprioceptively and kinesthetically aware. In other words, develop an awareness of where your body and its parts are in space and how your muscles are contracting to achieve that location. Once you've done that, ensure that you have pure biomechanics to ensure that you're transferring energy evenly throughout your system. You should train your tissue so that the load demands of your sport are well within its capability. Lastly, adequately supply yourself with nutrients before you play your sport and do the same after to allow for timely and complete recovery. These are the four main facets: spatial and kinesthetic awareness, mechanical purity, tissue preparedness, and nutrition. I am of the belief that every injury has some traceable root cause, and apart from contact injuries and those due to unstable terrain, the root cause of all injuries can be traced back to one of these four facets, and thus can be prevented if one only knows how. Now, first, to improve bodily awareness, one should move with intent more often. And what I mean by that is that in any movement that one performs, they should try to feel the tissues responsible for that movement at every moment throughout the process. So take, for example, like me reaching to grab this ball. If I wanted to develop a better awareness, I would focus on every contraction throughout the movement. So if I reach to grab the ball, I'd first feel my delt contract, I'd feel my tricep contract to extend the elbow, I'd feel my forearm muscles contract to grab the ball, and I'd feel the maintenance of all of this contraction while the ball is still in the air. And then as I'm bringing it back, I would feel my delt relax, I'd feel my tricep relax, and I'd feel my forearm maintain the contraction to hold the ball in my hand. So move with intent. Oftentimes I've found that people have never moved with intention and thus have never put energy towards mapping where their body is in space and mapping the contractile sequences that got them there. The awareness of these things is important somewhat for decreasing the chances of contact injuries, as knowing where your body is in space is essential for knowing how it will interact with a colliding body. But it's more widely important as a prerequisite for ensuring the purity of one's biomechanics. Biomechanics are vital for maintaining healthy tissue. In my experience, oftentimes the overuse injuries people experience, be them tendinopathies or shin splints or whatever else, are usually due to movement imperfections, leading to an uneven transference of loads between the tissues. In this way, they are technically overuse injuries, denoting an excessive amount of activity, excessive amount of load on the tissues. But what people fail to realize is that when certain tissues take on much more load than they're supposed to in a given movement, those people severely decrease their capacity for movement. In other words, if you are to perfect your mechanics, you will eliminate any loss of movement capacity that you would suffer from mechanical imperfections, placing excess loads on tissues and therefore degrading them faster. To perfect your biomechanics, look to the catalogs of research that have already been created on what works and what doesn't when it comes to moving. People like Nadia Aguilar of Functional Patterns and people on Instagram like the Holistic Athlete have great stores of information on movement. From these people, you'll learn what movement strategies work very generally for humans. But because every biomechanical system is slightly different, you should further explore by trying different movements and different movement strategies and seeing what feels right and what doesn't for your system. I should say that when I mean try different movements, I mean that you should try to discover as many new patterns as you can from the infinite bank of possible movement sequences. Move an arm differently, move a leg, and later try to move the entire chain in a new way. Next, I'll talk about tissue preparedness in relation to necessity. So every movement within every sport requires different amounts of energy to be produced at different rates from different angles. If you want to prevent injury, you should find out what capacity your sport requires you to have in regards to how you need to produce energy, and then prepare your tissue beforehand by training in a way that increases your capacity comfortably beyond what is necessary in each category. So I believe that the range between what you can do and what you have to do will play a large role in determining the likelihood of injury. In other words, I believe that the closer your movement gets to reaching the maximum capacity of your tissues, the more likely you are to be injured. Or in other words, the more likely your tissue is to fail to perform that movement. Take, for example, an athlete performing a 150-pound squat. The athlete whose 1 rep max is 300 pounds is less likely to be injured than the athlete whose max squat is 175 pounds, assuming all other factors are equal. Now, this principle of the distance between your performed capacity and your maximum capacity starts to be less important in most sports, because in most sports, you're going to be performing all the movements at or near your maximum capacity. So in football, you're going to be sprinting as fast as you can. In basketball, you're going to be jumping as high as you can. In baseball, you're going to be throwing as hard as you can. You're going to be performing, or at least intending to perform, near maximum capacity. So following the throwing example, an athlete whose system is not used to producing and transferring maximum energy, whose system has not experienced completely precisely directed intensity in the throwing motion, will ultimately be doing guesswork when that athlete tries to perform. If you need to move fast, train in ways that accustom your body to fast movement. If you need to move heavy loads, accustom your body to heavy loads. If your necessary output falls somewhere in the middle, get your body used to that output so that controlling it is intuitive when you go to play your sport. This is the biggest mistake I feel like people make when preparing for a movement. Their training doesn't mimic the movement accurately, and thus their systems do not become accommodated to that movement. Like, for example, in the gym, some sprinters squat very heavy weight, but they don't get their joints used to moving at maximum speed. Certain baseball players get really good at bench press, but don't develop the strength through the end ranges of the movement that'll be needed when throwing a baseball or trying to throw a baseball at max effort. In sum, if you want to prevent injury, don't just try to learn to produce a lot of force generally. Know what will be asked of your body and become very capable in those requirements. Okay, finally, I'll talk about nutrition. So when it comes to providing the tissue with the resources it needs to perform and then to recover, there are a few general principles I like to follow. I eat a good amount of protein throughout each day. Protein is what your tissues are repaired with after movement. I usually eat around 110 to 130 grams per day, which ends up being around 0.7 grams per pound of my body weight. A common opinion, especially in the bodybuilding realm, is that the optimal protein consumption is around 1 gram per pound. I found that my personal recovery reaches its maximum rate at about 0.7 grams. Now, this value varies from person to person, so I suggest to you to experiment with some different daily protein intakes and decide what feels best for you. Also, I try to consume around 30 grams of protein every 3 to 4 hours. Protein synthesis rates, the rate at which your body will metabolize protein and not waste it, are boosted by protein consumption and begin to decline about 3 to 5 hours after eating. So because rates of protein synthesis are finite, there's a limit to how much protein can be ingested in one sitting and used completely for tissue regeneration. I find this limit to be around 35 to 40 grams for my body. Again, it's different from person to person. It increases as your body weight increases. I've also found that the body signals when protein can no longer be metabolized as foods containing protein like chicken and beef and eggs start to become less desirable. Again, I advise you to experiment with different amounts of protein consumption and see at what point you stop desiring those protein-filled foods. In the hours before intense movement, I'm sure to eat plenty of carbs so that my muscles can gather glycogen stores to be used as the fuel for the muscle contractions that create movement. If I know it's going to be a lot of sustained activity, a game or something that lasts a while, I may bring a carbohydrate-filled snack to eat during that activity. In sum, injury doesn't happen for no reason. It's not a game of chance. If you get injured, it means the injured tissue simply was not strong enough to sustain the force imposed upon it. The reason for this, assuming a non-contact injury in a stable environment, is due to a lacking in bodily awareness, biomechanical purity, tissue preparedness developed through training, and or a lacking in nutrition. The perfection of these capabilities in relation to the physical demands required of you would theoretically make all non-contact stable ground injuries impossible. While perfection is a very hard task to accomplish, take solace in the fact that by merely improving in any of these categories, you will be decreasing your risk of injury.